All right, welcome back to another edition of the Bible, Bearded and Bald. And this week we're going to be continuing our seven churches prophecy study. We're going to be looking at the church of Smyrna. This is in Revelation chapter 2, verses 8 through 11. But a little bit about Smyrna. This was a key economic hub in the ancient world. And even today, it's known as Iskar in modern Turkey. It was settled in the 8th century or so, maybe even earlier, but definitely in the 8th century. The Aeolian Greek ethnic group, one of the four divisions of the Greek peoples, according to the 6th century BC author Herodotus. The other ones are the Dorians, the Ionians, and the Chians. But the Aeolians settled this area of Asia Minor in Anatolia, and they settled this city of Smyrna. So Smyrna was known as the crown of Asia because of its extravagant beauty. The Aeolians, as I mentioned, founded it in the 8th century. It was destroyed by earthquakes and wars and different things, but it was rebuilt by Alexander the Great. And Alexander wanted to restore this ancient city to its magnificent origins, and he worked hard to get the city back to its former status. A little bit about the Aeolian Greeks. They were one of the four Greek ethnic tribes, but if we go back earlier, the Greeks descended from a man named Javan, or however you would pronounce it back then, but Javan was a son of Japheth, who was the son of Noah. So after the flood, about 100, 200 years or so, you have the Tower of Babel, and everybody scattered out and formed these nations, and Javan and his four sons that are named in the Bible settled in Greece. In the Greek Isles, the four sons of Javan, they started forming these ancient civilizations. And eventually they developed into different ethnic groups, but the Aeolians, who settled in Asia Minor, Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, they formed this city Smyrna, which had a direct route to the important city of Athens. So this was a major economic hub. And it was 35 miles south of Ephesus. You can look on the ancient mail route in Asia Minor, and Smyrna was number 2 on the list. You had Ephesus, then Smyrna, then Pergamon, then Thyatira, and then Sardis, and then Philadelphia, and finally Laodicea. It was in a U-shaped, which reminds me of the meaning of repentance. Repentance means to make a U-turn, to turn around, and that's the main message to the seven churches. So during the Hellenistic period, the period following Alexander's conquest of the world, an incredible conquest of the world, they set up colleges and spread Hellenistic culture, Greek culture. I've got the writings of Homer here, the Iliad and the Odyssey behind me. Some would say, why does a Christian even want to have that? Well, I think ancient history plugs into the Bible just fine. I think there is some synchronism there. I don't follow the gods that are mentioned in the Odyssey or the Iliad, but they help fill in the story of what was going on in biblical times in other parts of the world. Homer himself, it was said, it was from the river Milos in Smyrna. And that is near where the Romans built the Agora, which was the great marketplace in the city of Smyrna. And we will be getting more into this when we get into the study of Pergamos, or Pergamum, depending on your translation, that Smyrna was in this territory, this Greek territory in Hellenistic times, first owned by the general of Alexander named Lysicamus. And then later, this section, which became Pergamum, was donated to the Roman Republic. In fact, it was the first part of Greek culture that was donated toward the soon-to-be Roman Empire. And they actually, to form a bond of unity, they created a cult of a goddess named Roma. That's where the patron goddess of Rome came from, and that was Pergamos. Rome inherited a lot of religious beliefs from the Greeks, especially in Pergamos. But we'll talk about that more on the next video next week when we cover Pergamos. Now, we've talked about this before, but Revelation, it has a chiastic structure. And if you haven't seen the series on the chiasm of Revelation, you need to go look at that playlist. It will help you out a lot. Or just search it online, the chiasm of Revelation. I'm not the only person who talks about it, but there is a certain structure to the book of Revelation that is key to its understanding. The seven churches prophecy covers the entire history of the Christian era. It begins with Ephesus, the early church, the victorious church that got the gospel to the then known world, and then it goes all the way forward to the Laodicean church, and that's the church time period that we are living in. Now we're going to be covering Smyrna, which is the second church time period, and that is the time of the Roman persecutions when they were the heaviest. And so we'll be looking at some of those. But that's not to say that the seven letters of Revelation did not have an immediate application to the churches that they were written to. It would be foolish to say that they didn't. But Revelation, remember, is a chiastically structured book. And in taking the method of historicism, we're going to see that the prophecies began in John's day and they continued to the second coming. And so we'll see the seven churches prophecy cover the entire history of the Christian era. We'll see the seven seals prophecy parallel that same prophecy covering the same time period, the entire Christian era. Then we'll see the same with the seven trumpets. And that will conclude the historical wing of the chiasm, and we'll get to the main focus of Revelation, which is chapters 12 through 14. And that is how Hebrew literature and many other ancient literatures worked, is that the main point of it was in the middle, not the end, as it is in the West. So now we will look at some of those verses that reinforces the idea of historicism in the opening verses of Revelation. I also want to remind you that the book of Revelation is a book of symbols. It's not that it's symbolic of nothing. It's not figurative or idealistically symbolic. It's symbolic of literal truths. John had to do this because he wrote it on the Isle of Patmos. He was put there by Emperor Domitian, who also persecuted Christians. And so he wrote it in symbols to where if you weren't clued in, you wouldn't know what he was talking about. He uses heavy Old Testament language. There are so many Old Testament allusions, direct quotations, partial quotations that you can even count. It's packed full of the Old Testament. I see new Old Testament references every time I read the book of Revelation. So we're going to look at the historicist interpretation of Revelation. We're going to look at the verses. You can also check out the videos on historicism and preterism and futurism, the three main methods of interpretation in Revelation. We're choosing the historicist model. Now we're going to provide some scriptural proof for that. So again, the historicist model of Revelation teaches that the prophecies begin in the day of the prophet and go to the second coming. I know that I'm repeating myself a lot on that, but repetition deepens impression, and once you understand this, the apocalyptic prophecies of Daniel and Revelation make much more sense. So check this out. The revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave to him to show unto his servants, now catch this, to show unto his servants things which must shortly come to pass. So when are they going to come to pass? Shortly. So there is an application, a beginning that takes place in the day of John, the author of Revelation. He reaffirms that by saying, "Blessed is he that readeth." Who? The people that are actually reading it in his day. "And they that hear the words of this prophecy, and keep those things which are written therein." Now notice this, "for the time is at hand." Meaning there is an application right now in John's day. That is when it begins.